Rev it up and welcome to Cars Yeah, show number 1304.
Most of the time when you look around and you see the people who are best at what they do, it's because they show up every day and they work at it.
This is Cars Yeah, where you'll enjoy interviews with inspiring automotive enthusiasts. Mark Green is here to provide you with a fuel injection of automotive inspiration. So get in, sit down, buckle up, and get ready for a wild ride here on Cars Yeah.
Hello, automotive enthusiasts. I'm revved up and so excited to introduce today's very special guest calling in from Bay Village, Ohio, John Neff. Hey, John, are you buckled up and ready for a fun ride?
Yeah, let's rock and roll.
All right. John Neff is the global editor-in-chief at Motor One, where they provide automotive news, reviews, features, and a lot more. John is an automotive journalist who has helmed some of the biggest automotive digital publishing brands on the web. For 10 years, he was editor-in-chief of AOL's car site Autoblog, and for the last 3 years, he's been global editor-in-chief of this new automotive news and reviews website called Motor1.com, which operates 10 editions around the world in 9 different languages. So, John, I've told our listeners just a little tiny bit about you. Would you take a brief moment, share a little bit more about your career and a very obvious passion for automobiles?
Sure, I'd love to. So I am as much into cars as I am into car magazines. That's where my love of cars kind of started. When I was a little kid, I would go to the grocery store with my mom, and at some point it switched from her buying me candy bars to buying me car magazines. And I collected them pretty much throughout all the 90s, all of which every issue is still in my garage right now. So yeah, I kind of fell in love with this medium of talking about cars. And it just so happened when I graduated college, the internet was coming up, and I never dreamed I could write for a car magazine. But once the internet kind of democratized media, it gave me some new opportunities, and I wound up becoming editor-in-chief of Autoblog, which when it was very small, but it was good timing. And I was there for 10 years. And while it grew to become the largest automotive site on the web at the time. And then I sparked off on my own in the teens, and wound up here at Motor One, where we're doing something similar to Autoblog, but also on a much larger international scale. So I've been doing this for 3 years, and it's been great. Now we're again one of the biggest automotive sites in the world. So yeah, and I hope to be doing this for a long time.
Well, it's very cool. Obviously, you have a very wise mother where she did something a lot healthier, switched you from candy bars to car magazines, and look where it took you.
Maybe. Although I was very hard on my family because I'm such a perfectionist. I wouldn't let anyone damage the car magazines. So if somebody set a glass on one or a beer bottle, they would hear it from me, even though I was the youngest person in the house. So I think I was quite a bear to live with throughout all those years because of that. But you're right, better than candy bars.
Yeah, I think so. Very cool. Well, as we continue on your journey, I always like to ask my guests for a success quote or a mantra. This is some kind of saying that's been inspirational and informative for you. Informing your success, I should say. It's a nice way to get the inspirational tires turning here on Cars Yeah. So, John, grab the wheel.
Yeah, so I don't have a saying so much as a couple of words, which are attitude and consistency. I think for me, and a lot of my job is managing other people and managing kind of an organization. And to me, attitude is as much, if not more important than talent, which might sound weird, but I would much rather work with someone who isn't the best writer, but who has a great attitude than the best writer in the world who doesn't have the best attitude. Because to me, you can get farther with a good attitude than you can with just raw talent. And I also think consistency is important, just showing up to do the work. But not many people in this world are born with just natural God-given talent. And most of the time when you look around and you see the people who are best at what they do, it's because they show up every day and they work at it. Even if they never feel like they're the best, it's just important to them to put in the time. So I've always felt like just consistency, showing up and doing the work is more important than anything.
This is a really common thread, and I see this quite a bit on the people that follow me and social media that are coaches or business coaches, or this day, of course, in social media, everybody's an expert in something, right? And it's such a simple thing. Having run a business and managed hundreds of people in the past for me, I would agree with you 100%. I'd much rather have an employee that maybe wasn't as good at their task or their skill sets, but had a great attitude and would show up to work on time, which is a simple concept, right? But it's amazing to me how many times I'd have to sit somebody down and go, you just need to show up, dude. Just show up. I mean, I used to buy alarm clocks for employees that were not timely. Even if they were managers that would show up late to managers' meetings, it would get very frustrating when you're sitting in a room and there's 10 people in there and you're just counting the dollars that are ticking away, waiting for this one late person, right?
And especially if you're trying to work your way up in a company, it shows that you care and you're invested. Mm-hmm. If you're there on time, or even if you're putting in extra time, but when you show up late or you're inconsistent, it very clearly communicates that this isn't that important to you. So yeah, as managers, I mean, those are just little flags that I think we pick up so quickly and can probably tell very early on whether this is going to work out or not.
I thank my late father for this lesson he taught me in life. He grew up on a farm in Texas where you have to show up, because if you don't, the cows will die, the crops will die, and then your family will die. And he used to always say, get to work before the boss and don't leave until the boss leaves, even if you're the guy who sweeps the floors. And be consistent and be enthusiastic, and good things will happen. So very nicely said.
That's exactly what my mantra is. It's funny you say that, because in the early days of my career, when I was at Autoblog and we would go to auto shows like the Detroit Auto Show or the LA Auto Show, we knew that the really big magazines were there, like Motor Trend and Car and Driver. And our mantra was to be the first to show up in the media room and be the last to leave. And we wanted the Motor Trends and the Car and Drivers just to know that we were working harder than them. And so that was what we lived by.
Psychological warfare. I love it.
Exactly.
I love it. Well, let's go back in time a little bit here and talk about a story that instigated your passion for cars. Is there a pivotal moment in your life when you knew you were indeed a car guy? Was it at the newsstand when you picked the car magazine instead of the candy bar, or did it go further back than that?
I don't know that went further back than that. And I don't know what drew me to the car magazines, but I remember this one article that I read in a Road and Track. And I looked it up the other day. It was called Smoke and Mirrors, and it was by Kim Reynolds. And the whole article was about three cars: the Ferrari 512 TR, which was, a supercar, the Porsche 911, which was, an expensive sports car, and the Toyota Supra, which in the 90s was a very fast car, but it wasn't nearly as expensive as those other three. And the whole article was just about these. It was about the fact that these three cars all had the exact same performance numbers. Functionally, they could all do the same thing. They could all go 0 to 60 in 4.7, and they could all have a top speed of this. But for some reason, they were all wildly different prices, 40,000, 70,000, 180,000. And the article was kind of exploring what accounts for that difference in price. And, I think that article did two things for me. It showed me how interesting cars were as both products and pieces of art. And I think that's what that article was about. It was the Ferrari was a piece of art. And you that was baked into its value, but it was also a product, and the Supra was more of just a product. And I thought that was so interesting how cars could be both. But then it also showed me how interesting and insightful writing about cars could be, and I think that's where I kind of fell in love with writing about cars.
I don't remember that story, but I love the concept about it, because like you, I've been reading car magazines forever. I love the whole concept about it, because you're right. People will go to car shows and look at one car and another and say, well, why is that one worth so much more? Well, there's exclusivity. There's also production costs. If you've ever been to these factories, if you go to a Toyota factory, the way they're pumping out cars versus the Ferrari factory or Lamborghini factory, and then you want to go really crazy, Pagani or any of these they're hand built. Back in those days, Ferraris were indeed, hand-built cars. They are kind of still today, although the factory is much more automated in recent years. And now Toyota's bringing back the Supra, right? Which is kind of cool.
Right. Well, and it was funny because I remember one thing the article said about the Supra, because it was talking about the car designs. And it was saying, when you look at that Supra, which again was the 90s Supra, the design was kind of bland. And the author wrote about how you can look at the lines and see where someone in a committee raised their eyebrow, and that line got smoothed out.
Yeah.
And in the Ferrari, it's one person's vision that's totally pure and unadulterated and as wild as that person wanted it to be. And I think that was true at the time, but you're right. You look at the new Supra that just, came out, and we see all the reviews online right now for it. And that thing looks incredibly wild. So I think times have actually changed since that article was written, where even mainstream manufacturers now have kind of put out these so interesting designs that aren't boring at all, but are actually really kind of interesting and wild, and definitely not designed by committee like maybe they were in the past.
Well, thank goodness. I was just telling somebody the other day, there's so many vanilla cars, as I call them. They're just kind of all the same. There's nothing exciting. We were sitting in a restaurant a few weeks ago watching cars go by, and I was with my daughter and her fiance and my wife, and I was just talking about, I'm sure their eyes were all rolling back in their heads because they're not car people.
I know that look.
Yeah. I was like, how about an exciting car? When is an exciting car going to drive by? And lo and behold, pull up early 80s Mercedes SL. And I went, now that's an interesting, fun car, cool, kind of cool car compared to everything. But I'm glad to see that people like Toyota are stretching their bounds, and maybe some of those committee guys or suit guys weren't in the room when they did the final selection.
It certainly doesn't seem like they were.
Well, I hope not. Yeah. Well, let's talk about a challenge or a failure you faced. And I like this question, not so much to bring up maybe some pain in your past. However, it's more about what you learned from that situation, so that perhaps someone out there listening who's going through something similar sees there is a light at the end of the tunnel and it's not a train coming at them. So walk us through that experience, get kind of personal with us, and tell us how that helped you gain even more momentum as you move forward in your career and your business and your life.
Sure. I'll tell you about when I've left jobs, and I've left 2 jobs where I didn't know what I was going to do next. And that's not normally how you should do it.
That's a brave move.
Right. Exactly. And the only thing I made sure to do, I think, in each case was that I'd be okay for a little while. Like I had, a few months of runway to figure out what I wanted to do. But in each case, I'm always very hesitant to leave a job because I normally like what I do and I like the people. But there's always one thing that starts small and then grows big and big until you just, don't want to do it anymore. And I remember when I left Autoblog, which was around 2014, and I didn't know what I was going to do next. And I got some good advice from my brother, who had given me the same advice about 10 or 11 years earlier. And he told me, just write down anything that you like doing. And it doesn't matter what it sounds like. It doesn't matter if it doesn't sound like a job. Just write down what you like doing. So I would write down everything, I don't know, reading a comic book to, going to see movies or whatever. And then he told me, now look at that and just ask yourself, is there anything you can do here that you can turn into a job or find a job through? And I actually found one on the list that was, and I had written down, I really like researching products that I want to buy. Like I spend months researching what I want to buy before I buy it. And that led me to a website called Wirecutter. Which some of your listeners may know. And it's a great site and they produce incredibly in-depth buying guides about electronics and home goods and things like that. Out of nowhere, I contacted the owner and the founder and said, hey, have you ever thought about doing anything with cars? And this is my background. And he responded kind of like, maybe, we've thought about it in the past. And I kind of just thought, well, I'm not doing anything right now, so I'm going to write a car guide for this guy in his own form that he's done it for other products, and I'm just going to submit it to him. So I did that, and when I did that, he was really blown away and surprised that I would go that far, and he saw that I kind of got their vision, and that turned into my next job. So
cool.
It was very cool, and I'd even gotten some offers to do the same thing I was doing, but I really wanted to try something different. So I guess this was a failure in my sense, in that I left and I was incredibly worried and scared. I had no idea what I was going to do next, or if I would get a job offer for anywhere. And I just went through this process of kind of looking at what I liked doing, what my strengths were, and can I see any pathway through that to. And I don't want to make it sound so crass as like a path to making money, but is there any way that I can turn one of these things into something I can do for a living?
Well, why not? Yeah, I mean, it is kind of important to make a living.
Right. And that was like whether it's for someone else or whether I'm going to do it myself and start something new. So yeah, those are really hard times in life. So but I think, you shouldn't be scared. I always like the saying that you should bet on yourself.
Yeah. This is an awesome story for anybody out there that might be going through a similar situation. As you were walking through this, I was smiling to myself because when I left my previous position, and was really trying to figure out where I wanted to go next, I did very much the same thing. I just sit down and started writing ideas out and things like that. And lo and behold, what really led me to podcasting was my son saying, Dad, you've taken me to car shows my whole life. What's the one thing I tease you about? You can't walk by somebody without talking to them about their car and their business. Why don't you do that for a living? I'm like, well, how do you make money doing that? And he goes, well, there's this thing called podcasting. I'm like, really? What's a podcast? And
Wow.
you start investigating it. And then lo and behold, 5 years later and 1,304 shows later, here we sit. So
yeah, that's amazing.
Plus a TV show. So you never know where things will take you. But I think the most important lesson I heard from this is what your wise brother said. And that was write down what you enjoy. Think about what you like to do and then find a way to wrap that into a career and into a life. And I can tell you after talking to you, John, and 1,300 plus people, it is the key, the secret sauce to a happy life. It really is.
Yeah. And I think the distinction between writing down a list of what you like doing versus writing down a list of what you're good at is important.
Yes,
because
yes.
I was good at running an automotive website. I had just done that for 10 years, but I didn't necessarily want to do that next. And I left that job for a reason. So he was really smart to zero in on like you've been doing something for so long and you're very good at it, but why don't you write down what is really bringing you joy to do in your life? And again, it doesn't have to be something that turns into a job. Just start writing the list and it'll kind of lead you to where you need to go.
Golden nuggets of wisdom from John Neff today. I like it. Very good. Very good. Well, let's talk about your first really special vehicle. The first car you got that had great meaning for you in some way. Maybe because you paid for it. Maybe because you really loved it. Maybe it's something that you had strived for a long time. And maybe if you would, share a special memory you have about that ride.
Sure. So in high school, I had a lot of cars in a row that were like sub $1,000 cars, which I would buy them myself. I had a job in high school, and I had some boring ones like a couple of Volkswagen Jettas. And then I think my fourth car was a 1984 Toyota Celica GT. And it had super wide fender flares. It actually had the louvers on the back. It was so cool looking. And the one memory that sticks out was I was a junior in high school, and I was standing in the parking lot kind of near my car, but a group of younger kids walked by, and I heard one of them say, how sweet that car was. And it's kind of silly to be proud of that, but it gives you kind of a rush and a sense of pride when people think your car is cool. And that was the first time that it happened to me. But I also, now that I'm so much older, I've also realized and I've owned a couple more kind of cool cars I've always wanted to own. It's also enough if just you think the car is cool too. Like I've owned cars where nobody thinks it's cool, but it makes me happy. And that's great too.
That's all that matters. I call it the look back. If you park your car and walk a few steps and turn and look back, then you know you picked the right car.
Yeah, that's a great measure for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, is there a car you've owned that you've let go that you have a lot of seller's remorse over?
Not seller's remorse, although, I do have a buyer's remorse one where, and this goes back to how much I research things before I buy. My wife and I were looking for a car for her, and I had researched for months and months, and we eventually found what we wanted, which was a 2012 Volkswagen Jetta Sport Wagon TDI. So it was the diesel version. But we found it like 7 hours away. So we kind of spontaneously hopped in the car we had and drove down. We were intending to buy it, and we did, although when we got there, it wasn't in as good a condition as we thought. We drove it home, and we drove it for like a week, and we were just kind of both unhappy with it. I think because it wasn't in as good condition as we thought, and like we wanted this. This was our one car. So I just decided after like a month, to start from scratch, and we went back to kind of our second choice, and we went and bought a brand new Kia Soul and traded that Jetta in, and it was the best decision. We've had that Soul for 5 years now, and absolutely love it. And that really taught me don't settle. If you know what you want, and even if you make a mistake and buy something you find out that you don't want, there's always time to change, even if it feels like you've passed that point. So,
well, you made a 7-hour drive commitment. That was a hard commitment to walk away from, I'll bet.
It was, and that was my, and I don't
probably one of the mistakes, probably. Right?
I don't want to blame it on my wife, but
no, don't do that.
Right. When we got down there, having invested 7 hours and however much gas money, she was like, I don't want to leave empty-handed. So it's like, we thought, oh, it's good enough, and the cars are important to me, and it's not enough to be good enough. Like, I want it to be the car I want, because it's such an intimate object in your life that you drive every day, and it protects you, and you have fun in it. So yeah, the soul that replaced it is a member of the family now. So
another thing I always say to people, if they're going to go buy a car, especially if it's a toy collector car, but could be another kind of car or daily use cars, is take a friend who can be somewhat objective and tell that friend when you get there, talk me out of this.
That's funny. I did that once too, and that didn't work. The friend talked me out of it.
The friend liked it so much he bought it.
No, I think he just saw how much I'd always wanted it, and he knew, like, no matter what I say, you're going to buy this. So
yeah, been there, done that for a few people. Usually what I have is friends' wives calling me saying, talk Bill out of this car he wants to buy on Bring a Trailer. I'm like, oh man, this is a delicate line to walk. I got to keep them both happy.
It's funny you mentioned Bring a Trailer. I did kind of something similar, but worse than that. I had a friend who had wanted to get into the business of writing about cars, and I introduced him to the guys at Bring a Trailer, and he left his job and now writes for Bring a Trailer, which I think is much to his wife's chagrin. Like, that was not supposed to be the result of that conversation. And he just took delivery of his first car that was bought off the site as well. So very, very dangerous website.
Yeah, Randy Nonnenberg was a very early guest of mine here. I need to have him back. I haven't talked to him in a long time. Pretty brilliant. When he was on the show, they were just launching their auctions, which have become super successful for them. Yeah, big game changer. So very cool. Well, I would love for you to talk a lot more about what has you excited and fired up these days with Motor1.com. Explain to our listeners that maybe perhaps haven't visited the site, what they're going to see, what they're going to experience, and what they can look forward to.
Sure. So Motor One is an automotive news and reviews website. So much like your Motor Trends and your Car and Drivers, except we're on the web only. So we publish a lot of car news per day. There's usually at least about 25 articles that are published per day on Motor1.com.
25 a day?
25. A lot of news, at least one car review or first drive per day. And then that number goes way up if an auto show is happening. So we go attend all of the auto shows around the world in person and write about every car and concept that debuts. We do original video, all that stuff. And, we like to become a website that enthusiasts, but also car shoppers find their way to, and then can't help but coming back. And I'll tell you that what I'm most excited about right now is that we actually just started our own podcast. We're 6 episodes in,
cool.
Far from your 1300, but we're going to get there.
Keep the revs up to catch up. But
exactly. And I get to host it, and I'm just having a ball doing it.
And what's it called?
Motor1.com podcast. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, and all the different places you get podcasts. Yeah, and it's just we did a podcast at Autoblog way back in the day, and I miss doing that so much because it's a much freer medium than writing. Because everything you write gets edited, flows through a few filters, but when you're on a podcast, it's just a conversation. And frankly, I find myself saying things I would probably never write and publish on the site, but it's just the flow of the podcast that goes wherever it wants. And so I'm having a great time doing that. And that's why I was so happy to come on this podcast, because I love just talking to people.
Well, it's cool. I wish you the best success with that. They're certainly a lot of fun. I'll remind our listeners, it's motor and then the number 1.com, motor1.com. You should go check it out. In fact, I just turned your site on to my son. He's looking to buy a vehicle. He had a car through high school and college, and then went off to work in a big city in San Francisco and didn't really need a car there. So we sold his car, and now he's thinking about getting something. He has some specific needs, and I was just talking to him the other day, and I said, I'm going to interview John Neff here from Motor One. You should check out their site because they have a lot of great reviews and things about cars, new cars in particular, that you can go and learn about. And he's the kind of guy that does a lot of research as well. So when you're going to invest that kind of money in a vehicle, definitely very cool. Well, John, up next is the last lap. Before we put the pedal to the metal, let's say thank you to today's Cars Yeah sponsors that make this all possible. Hey, fellow automotive enthusiasts, I'm a huge fan of Covercraft. I've protected my vehicles with their products since 1975. That's right, all the way back to my high school days. Want to keep your vehicle's exterior and interior looking new? It's easy with a Covercraft car cover. A car cover is the best way to keep your vehicle looking great for years to come. Car covers protect your paint from fallout, birds, dust, rain, insects, and pollen. It's a fast, easy, and inexpensive way to keep your vehicle looking new. I use my Covercraft car covers every single day. Right now, you can get 10% off all Covercraft custom car covers or their ready-fit car covers. Plus, they offer you over 15 quality fabrics to choose from. Their spring sale is from April 15th through June 16th, 2019. Order direct at covercraft.com and tell them Mark at Cars Yeah sent you. Covercraft is the right choice. Learn more today at covercraft.com. That's covercraft.com. Are you looking for a way to get your products or services into the ears of thousands of automotive enthusiasts around the globe? I can help. This is Mark Green here at Cars Yeah, and I'd be honored to be an influencer and ambassador for your brand in a unique and personal way. 5 days a week, thousands of subscribers and listeners enjoy the Cars Yeah podcast and website. Contact me today and I'll show you how at mark@carsyeah.com or connect with me through the Cars Yeah website at carsyeah.com. Hey, Mark Green here from Cars Yeah. Did you know you can now see me on the Cars Yeah TV show? It's a weekly visit to some of my past Cars Yeah podcast guests, and I take you along for the ride. You go behind the garage door and into their lives, their businesses, and you get to see what makes them successful. With tens of millions of viewers, Cars Yeah TV is making its mark. Cars Yeah TV is available on MAV TV and Lucas Oil Racing TV. You'll find MAV TV on Direct TV, Fubo TV, Fios by Verizon, or you can stream it through Lucas Oil Racing Television online. And they said I only had a face for podcasting. All right, John, we are back, and I have a very introspective question for you. If you woke up tomorrow and John Neff was a vehicle, manifested into a car, not what you want to be, but how you perceive yourself as a car, what would John be and why?
So that's such a great question and a creative question. And I would be one of my favorite cars of all time, which is the 1991 Ford Taurus SHO. And for those who don't know, it was, everyone knows the Ford Taurus. It's a, bland family sedan. But in the first generation of it, they had a performance version called SHO, which stood for super high output. And if you pop the hood on one of these things, the engine inside was a piece of art. You could display it in your home and it would be just as beautiful there. But I like it so much, and I think that car represents me because it's very unassuming on the outside. I mean, it basically looks like a regular Taurus, but inside is this really, powerful, kind of fierce engine, and the car can do a lot of things you wouldn't expect it. And I look at myself like that sometimes. Like I could probably walk in a room and not be noticed, but at the same time, if you give me 10 years, I'll make the most popular car website in the world.
There you go. I like that. Very well thought through. Very, very nice.
Thank you.
Well, we are entering the last lap. I'm going to fire off a series of questions and ask you to give our listeners some very quick blips of that Ford Taurus SHO engine. So here we go. What's the best automotive advice you've ever received?
Back out of your driveway slowly and always make sure you're not going to hit anybody.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. That's where those rearview cameras, I should say, come in handy. Whenever I rent cars, my car's a little bit older and I don't have one, and I rent these cars these days. They all have them, and I come home and I start backing my car up. I look at the dash. Where's the camera?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I've got an old car.
They're a nice crutch, but they're very useful.
Absolutely. Would you share one of your personal habits you believe has contributed to your many successes over the years?
I think one is not to listen to what everyone says you should do, but do what you think you should do. So if you believe in your idea, you should find a way to do it to see if it's right, and not just do what everyone thinks you should do.
Great advice. How about a great resource? Is there one out there you could share with us?
It's funny. I was trying to think of a car one, and I thought of something car adjacent because I've really gotten into RVs and motorhomes and camper vans and things like that. And right now, that's morphed into tiny homes as well. And there's this great YouTube channel called Tiny House Big Living, and they have an episode a week. And this guy does an incredible job interviewing people and showing how they built or designed these tiny houses on wheels and what they do with them, where they travel. So I highly recommend checking that out.
Yeah, I've watched that. That is pretty cool. I love that too. My father was an architect, and growing up with an architect, you're taught to really observe and look at things. And He was always very creative, especially with the house that he lived in that was a never-ending project. He was always doing something, building. I think he'd get done and then go to the back of the house and start over again.
Right.
Just kind of the way he liked to do it. And of course, I'll remind our listeners, another great resource, motor1.com, of course.
Yes, that too.
If I could sit down and arrange for you to have a drink with anyone in the automotive industry, living or deceased, so you could sit and talk with them, who would that be?
So I don't know who the person is, but I am fascinated right now by whoever is the product manager for the Dodge Challenger, which is, Dodge's muscle car. And I've been fascinated with this product and would love to meet whoever is managing its development, because it is so old and it is so outgunned by its competitors, the Mustang and the Camaro, but yet it is still so popular because whoever is in charge of it is making so many interesting decisions about how to keep it relevant and popular, like throwing a 700 horsepower engine in it and giving it wide body fender flares and doing all this stuff. I'm fascinated by how they've done so much with so little, and I would love to have a conversation with them about what those meetings were like 5 years ago when they told him, we're going to give you no money and we expect you to continue selling this car for another 10 years, and how he got to where he's at, where the Challenger is now handily outselling the Camaro and catching up to the Mustang. It's incredible.
Well, and especially in a big company like that like you've experienced in the past or understand, is all these suits that make decisions and higher ups that kind of squish all the design and the innovative thinkers many times in companies. So yeah, we'll have to figure out who that is. If any of our listeners out there know who that is, send me an email and I'll connect them with John and we'll get him on this show. I think that'd be pretty cool. Just email me at mark@carsyeah.com. Now, how about a book? Is there a book you've read that you think our listeners would enjoy?
Yeah, so I have two, actually, if you'll permit me. One,
of course.
I'll give you the one that's not about cars first, but I think is a great book about certain industries. It's called Console Wars by Blake J. Harris. And it's actually about the people who ran Sega of America, which was a video game console company in the 80s and 90s, and they were trying to take on Nintendo, which was the biggest company you could imagine back then. And so it's a story about kind of this ragtag group of people in an industry who took on a giant and won, but almost killed themselves doing it. And then the second book is simply titled Car, and it's by Mary Walton, and it's the story of when Ford redesigned the Taurus for its third generation. That was somewhere in the mid 90s. And if you recall, that generation of Taurus had all these ovals and was kind of really strange looking. And it's basically a story about how this company, because of kind of its old ways, took a great thing and ruined it, and so it's kind of a tragic tale. But it's kind of, if you watch the auto industry and especially our domestic automakers and shake your head at some of the decisions they make, this book shows you how they make those decisions, how they kind of come to those poor decisions and follow through with them.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, both of those books have not been recommended, which I'm quite surprised from all the books that are recommended here. And I'll remind our listeners, you can go to the website, carsyeah.com, and type in, or just actually go to the resources tab and you'll see guest recommended books. And I'll link these books there along with all the other well over 1,000 books that our past guests have recommended here. All right. We are up to the checkered flag. This is the fun part, John, as if we're not already having a good time talking about cars. But this last question can be a bit of a doozy. Today, I'm going to buy you any cool collector car on the planet. But there's a couple rules to the game that make it a bit of a challenge. It's the only collector car you can have. You have to drive it. No garage queens allowed here on Cars Yeah. And you can't sell it to buy a bunch of other toys with. So that little clever trick is off the table. What can I buy you today?
So I'm going to choose the Jaguar XJ220, which is a supercar, again, from the 90s. You can tell I came of age in the 90s. And I chose it because if you're going to pay for it, I do want it to be something expensive. So
thanks.
It'll cost you a couple $100,000 at least.
At least, yeah.
And it was just like I said, I was coming up in those times of the kind of a resurging supercar market, and there was the Lamborghini Diablo and there was the Ferrari F40, and I gravitated towards this Jaguar XJ220 because honestly, I think it's one of the most beautiful cars ever designed, and it's modern enough that. And comfortable enough because, the Ferrari and the Lamborghini were not ever considered comfortable cars in their day, but the Jaguar kind of was. It was almost like a really powerful GT car. And yeah, I just think it's the most beautiful thing. I'm assuming I would have another car that I could take to the grocery store and like Home Depot. But
this is your toy car. Yeah.
This is my toy car. This is the one I would drive to Cars and Coffee every weekend.
That's a unique choice, and I'm surprised. I'm not sure anybody in the past has picked that car. Maybe one or two of all the guests I've had on the show. Designed by Jim Randler and Keith Helfet. That car, 3.5 liter engine, twin turbocharged, which was pretty cool. 550 plus horsepower. A lot of power behind that car, but you're right. It's very comfortable, I guess I should say. I've never had the pleasure of driving one, but I have sat in one. I got inside and went, whoa, this is kind of interesting. This is cool.
Yeah, I remember reading about it back when it was new, and the test driver was describing a top speed run, and he said at 200 miles per hour, he had to turn the radio off because he couldn't. That's when he couldn't hear the radio anymore.
Oh my gosh!
And the name XJ220, the 220 stands for what its top speed was supposed to be, which was 220 miles an hour. And I remember again back in the day, it never really reached that because they actually had to swap out the engines that they intended to use for the one they did end up using. So it only reached 211 miles per hour, but that was plenty to beat the Ferrari and the Lamborghini.
If I remember right, that car had a really unique interior feature, and there were some gauges on the door.
That's right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So when you close the door, some of the gauges were over on the side panel of the door, which is very like, what? It's like they didn't have enough room on the dash or something. But there were some big vents there, I know, that probably kind of kept you cool. Maybe it was hot to drive. I don't know. But I just found that really interesting because I'd never seen that on a car before. It's kind of cool the way they wrapped it around, though. And everything was very smooth and luscious, I guess I should say.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was like the luxurious supercar of the day, and back then that had never really been done. I think supercars were more like beasts that just had a thin layer of leather on them to make them seem like they could be cars that were actually driven. But yeah, I think it was ahead of its time that way.
I think so. And even some of the supercars nowadays are beasts, if you will. I call them short-term cars because you have driving them for a little ways. You go, well, this was kind of a useless thing to buy.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, John, you've taken us on a great ride today. I've really enjoyed getting to know you better. I want to thank you for sharing your journey with the Cars Yeah audience. Could you offer us a little parting piece of wisdom or guidance before you rip off into the sunset in that Jaguar XJ220?
Sure. I think the advice I try to live by is whatever you do, do it well. Whether you love it or hate it, you should do it well because how you do something says a lot about yourself to other people. And I always have my dad in my head telling me not to do things half-ass. So I feel like I just can't do anything half-ass because he'll be in my head yelling at me.
There you go. I love it. I got that same voice in my head as well. And what's the best way our listeners can learn more about you and Motor One?
Well, definitely come to motor1.com. That's where you'll find my writing as well as a writing of a lot of great editors and authors, and subscribe to the motor1.com podcast if you want to hear me talk every week as well.
There you go. I think that sounds like a plan. Well, listeners, again, you can find everything John has shared on his very own Cars Yeah show notes page. Just go there, type in John Neff, Neff, and that page will pop right up. John, thanks for being so generous today with your time, your expertise, and for sharing your many wonderful experiences with our listeners. Until you and I talk again, I'll see you down the road.
Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. You take care of your cars, but who takes care of your investments? Tune-ups aren't just for engines. Updating your financial plan is important too. Your GPS may take you from A to B, but it won't help you on the road to financial freedom. For that, you need a good co-pilot and a very trusted advisor. Chris Kimball, CFP, is just the man for the job. He'll guide you down that road without driving you crazy. For over 25 years, Chris has helped people just like you and me with their financial planning and investments. With a master's degree in financial services, he is eminently qualified, and he's a car guy too. Learn more at chrisvkimball.com or call 866-ON-A-PLAN. Securities through Money Concepts Capital Corp., member FINRA SIPC. CK Financial Services is not affiliated with Money Concepts Capital Corp.
Thank you so much for joining us on today's ride here at Cars Yeah. Drive on over to carsyeah.com to find show notes and inspiring automotive fun. Download your free copy of Filler Up, a fun book filled with gorgeous photographs of fuel filler fun, including quotes from more inspiring automotive enthusiasts. Download your copy today, and we'll see you next time on Cars Yeah!